My next destination is a place where a group of women were considered so sacred, the fate of a civilization depended upon them. The Romans aped Greek art, Greek ideas, Greek gods. Aphrodite became Venus. Zeus, Jupiter. Rome did everything Greece did to the power of X. Mighty Rome also permitted the influence of women in the religious sphere, and one story in particular reveals an intriguing insight into how Rome viewed its women. The Roman Forum was once the political and religious centre of the Eternal City.
Here, right in the heart of ancient Rome, there was a religious institution that the Romans believed predated even Romulus and Remus. Its initiates were thought to be responsible for the security of the city itself, and each and every one of them was a woman.
Their cult was said to have lasted for over 1,000 years. They were 6 priestesses, known as the Vestal Virgins. The criteria for becoming a Vestal was very strict. Only prime specimens would pass the test.
The highest-ranking priest in Rome, the Pontifex Maximus, selected the girls between the ages of 6 and 10. They had to be of noble birth, both their parents had to be alive, and they had to be free of any kind of mental or physical deformity. But the key condition that they had to agree to for at least the next 30 years was to remain virgins.
And every day of their service, each of the girls was to wear a wedding dress. Free from any male guardianship, they became the brides of Rome itself. To find out about their extraordinary lives, I've come to the remains of the extremely grand villa where the Vestals once lived, to meet Corrie Brennan from the American Academy in Rome.
In a weird way, the individual Vestals were the embodiment of the Roman state. And they had no family. They were totally on their own. This was unique for women. No one owned them. But on the other hand, all eyes were on them as well.
And how far would these lives bear any relation to the lives of ordinary women out in Rome?
For ordinary women, there could not be more of a gulf. If you were going into a gladiatorial game at the Colosseum, where you would see the Vestal Virgins is in the front rows, where the other women would be at the top tier in the nosebleed section with the slaves. So there's an enormous gap between the Vestal Virgins and ordinary women.
Right next to the house of the Vestals was the temple of the goddess they served. Her name was Vesta, and she was the deity in charge of the hearth and of fire. And the single most important duty of the Vestals was to keep her sacred fire alive. The Romans believed that if the sacred fire kept burning, then Rome would survive.
And the fire of Rome holds the key to why the Vestals had to be virgins.
Why was this virginity so important? I mean, you know, for the people of Rome, what did their virginity represent?
The virginity goes part and parcel with a larger idea of perfection. Their purity resembled or mirrored the purity of the flame itself. They have to remain virgins in a way because they really had to keep the fire going at all times. Any distraction whatsoever from this very important work was too great to risk. So the whole idea of having sexual liaisons or really any sort of non-prescribed activity, all of this was a danger to the flame that represented the continuity and safety of the Roman state.
The Vestal's virginity, their capacity to create life, stored and held back, was the potent force which fueled Vesta's flame. The Vestals arguably had the most important job in Rome. But status came at a price. They lived on a knife edge. For the crime of allowing the fire to go out, a Vestal would be taken to a dark room by the Pontifex Maximus, where she'd be stripped and beaten.
But there was another crime that carried an even greater punishment. If the Vestals lost their virginity, then they were no longer able to protect Rome, and that deserved more than just a beating.
Ancient historians, Cicero and Asconius, tell us that in 114 BC, not one, but 3 Vestals were accused of the crime of incestum, losing their precious virginity. Their names were Marcia, Aemilia, and Licinia.
A slave who worked for the Vestals let slip that the 3 were no longer virgins. Marcia, he said, had taken just one lover, but the other 2 had slept with many men, including one another's brothers. There are even rumours of group sex. But it was only Marcia who was found guilty and condemned to death. And the way she was killed is the stuff of nightmares.
To harm a Vestal was to threaten the very existence of Rome. And so an elaborate, chilling method of disposal was devised to free the city and its occupants from blame.
Marcia was dressed in her funerary clothes, and her hands and her feet were bound. She was put into a sedan chair and carried through the streets in Rome, with her family and priests either side, as if they were going to her burial. But of course, at this point, Marcia was still alive.
After being paraded before the citizens of Rome, the funeral procession arrived at the entrance to an underground tomb.
With her hands still tied, the Pontifex Maximus himself led her in. When she reached the ladder at the entrance to the tomb, all the priests present turned their back on her. Once she reached the bottom, the ladder was taken away and the entrance to the tomb was sealed. She was left on her own with a lighted lamp, a blanket, a little bit of water, and some bread, milk, and oil.
Marcia was left to face her fate alone.
Some say the food was left as a gift for the goddess Vesta, or as a final act of kindness. But actually, it was just a pretense. It was a way the Romans could convince themselves that they didn't have the blood of a Vestal on their hands. Whereas in fact, of course, they'd left her to a lonely, lingering death.
It's one of the sad facts of life for the Vestals, or sad facts of death in this case, is that the execution of Vestals lines up pretty closely with Rome's great military disasters. Roman forces losing the field, something horrible must have happened in the relationship between the Roman Empire and the gods. And so who's to blame? Vestals were the first folks to get fingers pointed at them. There was scapegoating, for want of a better word.
You could argue that the sacred nature of the Vestals' lives paid them the ultimate honour, but their story is also a gruesome example of how controlling and brutal ideas about a woman's sexuality could be. These women may have carried the fate of Rome in their hands, but men still held their lives by a thread.
In ancient Rome, religion gave a select group of women a key role as priestesses, at the price of their freedom. But a new faith was about to appear, which would offer all female followers a radically new lifestyle.